Hi there, this is Erica Merrill, and I am the founder of Perfect Legal Video, and I am very excited to bring to you today dating tips from divorce attorneys. So we do have two family attorneys, that's a nicer way to say it. With us today, we have Attorney Nicole Reeves Lavallee out of Worcester. Hello, Nicole, thank you for joining us.
Hi, thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And we have, of course, Attorney Joe Nivin out of New York City. And so they both have years and years and decades of experience together doing divorce attorney work and dealing with matters in family court. And so really what you guys see at the end is the end of a relationship, and you hear everything about what went wrong, from finances to sex lives, even too much information, I'm sure, and from what happened with the kids and the in-laws, all of it. So I guess I'll let you both comment on that. I'll start with Nicole.
I always think it's interesting because people do want to tell me even how they started dating and what that person was like during the dating relationship and how they changed. And it's always very interesting because the reality is they don't change. Your just perception of them have changed. You've fallen out of love and now you see them for who they are, where a lot of times if you had spent the quality time beforehand getting to know that person and getting to know what their characteristics are and whether they're compatible with you, you might not be in this situation.
Yeah, and that's true. And it's funny because, and you can tell me that if this is true or not, but I think it's 53% was a quote I heard. 53% of marriages end up in divorce. And it's just like one of the biggest financial decisions you can make in your life, hooking yourself to somebody else. And there's hardly any research that goes into it. You don't know anything about really what the person's like, or their finances, or where they're going to go, what their plans are. People don't really research, and the fact is they fall in love fast and they fall out of love slow. And so I guess I'll let Attorney Joseph Nivin comment too on this original, to the first part of the topic here where we're talking about this.
Yeah, I definitely second what Nicole says. There are, of course, some cases where people do change, where people are different once they're married from the way they were before they were married. But for the most part, people do tell me that very often friends and family will say, yes, I kind of knew that person was crazy when you started dating them. I just didn't want to say anything. I've heard that the 53% statistic might not be as accurate as some websites would have people believe, but yes, it is. Divorce is something that happens to a lot of people. You know, that is the way that a lot of people's marriages end, and it's for a whole range of reasons. It could be issues with in-laws. It could be issues with finances. Infidelity is pretty common, even though very often that's a symptom of a larger problem. Or very often people just realize that while they might have been good as boyfriend and girlfriend, that they really don't have the same way of just generally doing things, and that breaks apart the marriage.
So let's talk a little bit about the red flags during some of the first dates, because I feel like, I mean, we've all dated. Some of us are unfortunately currently dating, but it's not an easy process because you go out and it's an interview process, and you want to focus on the good, but sometimes these red flags come up. So somebody tends to send their meal back constantly, or is very critical of the wait staff, or like there's just little things that can happen on a date. I guess, like, what are some of the red flags when you first start dating that you should really just decide to pull the plug and move on to the next?
If somebody's
Start with Joe. Go ahead.
If somebody claims that all of their exes are crazy, then the crazy one is probably the person that you're with and not every one of their exes.
I love that. I love when they want to tell you those crazy stories. What do you think, Nicole? What's another good one?
The funny thing is I couldn't have said it any better, and that's exactly what I was thinking. It's the fact that, you know, I can't believe I have to pay this amount in support, or, you know, things like that. Those little comments that really make you think, well, wait a minute. First off, why shouldn't you be paying that amount? We all know, anybody that's gone through this has heard of anyone that's gone through it. You know that child support is based off of guidelines. So they're not doing something irrational. So when somebody says that, it's kind of like, what, you don't want to pay for your children? It's just a bad sense in your mouth, and you're kind of like, oh, I don't know. So those are the types of things. And again, bad mouthing of the other person, bad mouthing somebody at the dinner table, again, not necessarily about whether they're bringing the food back, but again, well, I can't believe the waitress thinks that she's going to get a good tip, or something like that. Those are the things where you just got to hone in and listen. If you listen and you actually pay attention to what's being said and digest it, you know, you're not going to digest it right then and there, but take it home with you. Think about it. Does it make sense to you? Is it something that you can live with, or is it something that you feel is completely off kilter and, oh my God, their goals are not the same as mine?
That's a really good point. Now, you brought up a good point there, and I'm gonna just you know, jump off on this, where we're talking about dating someone who is already divorced, and like some of the things that you can pick up on with that. And one of the things you said is they complain about support, or they complain about their ex. You know, what are some of the other things that you can pick up on? I mean, how do you know that they're even ready to date some of those people?
Well, I think one of the issues is you don't necessarily know if it's an ex, or if it's just, you know, they had a relationship and they had a child. So let's first and foremost figure that out. Is it a divorce situation? Is it a paternity case? More importantly, do they have multiple paternity cases with multiple, you know, exes? Those are the things that you kind of have to look at and see what caters to your lifestyle. And again, if you're perfectly fine with it, then that's fine. But some people are not okay with that and do not want to get in a relationship like that. So you really got to focus in on what is going on with them and why they're alleging that this person or this situation is so bad for them.
And I think those are all really great points. I mean, it's definitely, there's a lot of grace involved when you're dealing with an ex, and when people especially want to hear about your ex. And I think it's always better to take the high road, because then you're the mature person. And honestly, if someone is that upset about their ex still, then, you know, there's probably still some emotions there, and they might not be ready to move on yet. I'm going to go back to Joe here. I wanted to know if you had any comments on what Nicole was saying. And in addition to that, I wanted to see if you have any comments on little red flags about finances in the beginning.
I definitely second what Nicole says. I think that it's absolutely correct that if you have somebody who's telling you about all these children that they have with other people, then you really have to internalize the fact that that's going to be a part of your life if you really want to have a relationship with this person. When it comes to finances, I think that one of the biggest things that I see is that when people assume that when somebody has a lavish lifestyle, that means that they have a lot of money. It doesn't necessarily mean that. I did a support case once where I represented this woman who was having a relationship with a married man. And the man took her on trips to the Hamptons, paid for her to travel to Paris. And eventually when she got pregnant and she had a child, it didn't work out. And suddenly he didn't have the money to pay her child support somehow, or he wanted to give her $50 a month in child support. So needless to say that one trip to Paris is a few years, $50 a month in child support. So I think the mistake that she made was that she figured that he had the money to support her and a child just because he had all the bells and whistles, when really all that means very often is that somebody's willing to take on a lot of debt to look like they're rich when they're really not.
That's so true. And, you know, it's about priorities too. I mean, sometimes they just would rather live that lavish lifestyle and continue making decisions to spend money in the way they want to spend money, instead of realizing that, oh my gosh, kids are just so much money.
Right.
And there's just so many things to pay for every single month, and you can't even imagine until you go through a divorce and you have to figure it out by week what the expenses are. So along that vein, I wanted to ask you, just while you're dating somebody, we'll go back to Nicole for this. What are some of the ways that you can figure out, like, people should really try to find out, number one, if, they're a spender versus a saver, but also, like, how much debt does somebody have? Like, it's pretty obvious when they have children and an ex-wife and those bills to pay for. It's not always so obvious, like Joe was saying, when, maybe they're charging everything up to go on these lavish, these lavish vacations and have a BMW, or, whatever the deal is. How are there any ways that you can kind of tell or broach the subject when you're in the dating phase?
Even if somebody is living that lavish lifestyle, maybe they have a good paying job, maybe it's 6+ figures. It doesn't mean that they're going to have the ability to pay their expenses. It doesn't mean that they're prioritizing those expenses. And a lot of times people will rather live on the credit cards and then deal with it later. And the problem is they don't deal with it later. And so if it goes along in your relationship, I certainly wouldn't say it's the first couple things you talk about. But, when you're a year into this relationship, you should be having more productive conversations with your significant other. So talk to them about that. Say, just ask them simple questions like, well, how do you deal with your finances and how do you budget? And you can ask general questions like that. Obviously, if you're in the engagement phase, then I would definitely say you should at least exchange financial statements or exchange documentation so that you know where you are at. All too often they're hiding that from you because that's the way they like it. And maybe that works, maybe it doesn't. The problem is you need to know what you're getting into. And also often people have this debt and they're ashamed of it. So they won't tell you, oh, let me hide my face, I can't do that. And that's exactly what happens is you find out after the fact and you go, oh my God, we have $50,000 in debt? What happened? And so then you compromise and you say, well, let's refinance the house and we'll get rid of that. Well, that cycle continues. That's the problem. You'll refinance the house till the hilt. And then at the end of the day, if you get divorced, you don't have any equity in the house because you keep refinancing it because that person hasn't changed their ability to budget. So you really need to find out, again, as soon as that relationship starts getting serious, and obviously once you're engaged, you really need to know those numbers.
Wow. And I don't know how many people actually do that. I mean, from your clients, and I'll ask this of Joe as well, but since we're talking about this with you, Nicole, do you have many clients that come in and they knew the numbers? And even, like, are there a lot of clients that had no idea even during the marriage what people don't want to talk about, these finances?
Right. And it's one of the number one reasons for a divorce. So I definitely think that that's an issue. A lot of my clients don't have any ideas of the numbers at all. So you really got to focus on that and really got to know what they are and ask for them. Even if you've been married for 20 years, if you don't know the numbers, when you're walking to my office, we will find them out. The problem is it's a little too late to fix anything at that point. And if they've mortgaged everything to the hilt, you're going to get half of nothing. Congratulations.
Sometimes people don't even know if they have a lot of mortgages out on their house, like a lot of refinancing. So we're going to go to Joe with this one. And I mean, what is your feeling on this? And what are you seeing with your clients? Do they know what they're getting into? And then furthermore, like, during the marriage, do they know what's happening with the finances?
Oh, I'm amazed when people walk into my office and one of the first things I want to do is figure out whether maintenance is an issue and what the child support is likely to be. I am shocked at how many people have no idea how much their spouse makes.
And so, I mean, that's during the marriage. I mean, so obviously before the marriage, when they're in the dating phase, is it any better? Or do you think they kind of knew and then it got worse where they just stuck their head in the sand and ignored it?
Yeah. I think it's probably the latter. That a lot of people, I feel like when people get engaged, they're so in love with each other a lot of the times that they ignore things like the other person being secretive about how much they make. So people can do all kinds of mental somersaults to justify doing what they want to do, like get married to somebody they're in love with, and kind of ignore that they're being shady about their financial condition.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess the best bet is no matter how difficult it is to ask for these numbers and to give your numbers, it's really important to figure out what you're getting into. I mean, if you're going to marry somebody, you're going to be sharing credit with them. So I mean, I guess let's do a little quick follow up. How many people have terrible credit at the end of marriage, from not knowing the numbers and not knowing what they're getting into? We'll start
It's
with
very
Nicole.
common.
Oh, it's common. Oh, we'll start with Joe.
I think that, well, the reason why a lot of people who start divorces are in debt, there are a few reasons. First of all, I think that a lot of people, when they're going through that pain of a marriage that's ending, they try to make themselves feel better by spending money on things they can't afford. There's also, some people do admit that they will make purchases that they can't afford as a passive aggressive way to get back at their spouse. And I think that also a lot of people run into marriage problems because they simply have unrealistic expectations for what the marriage is going to be like. Like maybe one person comes from a relatively wealthy family and they're used to having certain things, but they marry somebody who's more middle class or even upper middle class, and they still want all the things that they had growing up, but now they're in a position where they don't really have the money for it. Then there's some people that might have friends that have more money than they do, and they figure that if their friends have it, then they should have it too, even though they're married to someone that makes less money than the friend that has X, Y, and Z.
So a lot of keeping up with the Joneses.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on that, Nicole?
I think that's exactly the point. The other issues is, you might marry somebody or in the dating phase and they're at one job, they lose that job, they get a different job. Again, where are you in that relationship, and are they willing to tell you, hey, look, I took a pay cut, or I got a raise, or I'm getting these quarterly bonuses or things like that. So again, you are competing always with not only your social aspects of your families and your friends and everything else, but again, you're going, well, this is the lifestyle I'm used to, so I don't care that you lost a job or you changed jobs. We still need to live that lifestyle.
So yeah, people are not willing to make adjustments once there are adjustments being made in their lives for them. So I mean, that sounds like a tough situation. Now, we are going to talk a little bit about finding out, what type of person you're marrying. But before we do that, while we're on this topic of finances and trading financial information, I'd love to just touch on, and I know that's not really what this is about, but since people are dating and they're getting engaged, like with a prenup, like what are some of the biggest tips that you can give on broaching the topic, and what are the kinds of things that should be in a prenup? We'll start with Nicole.
The broaching the topic is probably the hardest one, but once you get that conversation started, it should flow. A lot of times, if you just say, hey, look, we need to make sure that we're compatible in all aspects. That's obviously one of the things that we have to worry about. Let's see where our finances are. I want to protect the assets I had prior. I certainly want you to do the same. And again, if you say that, I want you to do the same, I want to make sure that your assets are protected, you're going to get less feedback or pushback from that person, because they're going to understand, hey, wait, she's looking out for me, or he's looking out for me. And then obviously, once we do a prenuptial, which I think is a fabulous idea, by the way, but once you do that, you have to have full disclosure of all of your income, assets, and liabilities. If you don't, then the court is going to hold that document to be invalid. So you have to take a look at it. You have to give each person reasonable access to records. They have to exchange everything. They have to be comfortable with it. And then you can put parameters into it saying if you were married this amount of years, or you can leave it just generic as any assets that are acquired during the marriage are joint, or depending on how it's held. So you have a lot of different avenues that you can state once you actually talk about the prenup and what those terms are.
Well, that's very good advice. And I'm sure that that first conversation is tough, even, and especially when one person is probably got a lot more assets than the other person. And then it feels very lopsided and weird, I would imagine. So what are your thoughts on this, Joe? And what have you seen in your experience?
Yeah. Well, usually there's a reason why people get a prenup. Like I just did one where one of the the bride came from a very wealthy family, and she wanted to protect her family fortune. That's pretty much it. I don't really think that any bones were made about it, about the reason behind it. Um, Somebody could say I talked to a lawyer and make the lawyer the bad guy. I always encourage people to make me the bad guy to save themselves from grief. They could say I saw a video on Facebook where they were talking about how a prenup is a great idea, and this way take away a little bit of the blame from themselves. There's really nothing wrong with that. As far as what should be in a prenup, I think it should be, um, the pretty standard thing. What happens to the assets if there's a divorce? How do they dispose of the marital property? What are some of the options? How do they plan to file taxes if that's an issue? If somebody has stock options, is that marital property, or is that the separate property of the person that owns the stock options? How would they handle their estates? Are they going to waive their rights to share in the other one's estates? Are they going to protect the separate property that they're coming into the marriage with? These are all issues that can be laid out in a prenup.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And there's a lot to consider there. And honestly, those are the things that people go through when there's a divorce. So it's almost like you're mirroring it. You've got bookends going. So you're going to protect yourself so that at the end, there's not a lot of loose ends. You kind of already have a plan, and you know where things are going, and people understand where they are financially, and where they're going to be after a divorce. I mean, nobody wants to think about that in the beginning, obviously. So this was really good information about the financial portion. I do want to rewind back a little bit and ask about, and we've had a lot of interviews. All three of us have had a lot of interviews together on different aspects of family law. And one of the things that's pretty interesting and always has just some very eye-opening stories on people being sneaky. I mean, I'm going to start with Joe on this one. And it's like sneaky with money, sneaky with affairs. And, they're definitely not the people you thought you married when that stuff is happening. And the sneakiness might not be that they don't have a lot of money. It might even end up be that they were hiding money. It could be cash. It could be that they're making a lot more than they want. But things change during they're making a lot more than you thought. Things change during a marriage, and sometimes it's for the worse, and they're about to take your house because someone wasn't paying the mortgage, or sometimes they were making a lot and having you live at a kind of a poverty level, and you didn't know, and now they want to keep it all, of course. So what are I know you've had some interesting stories, Joe, on this. Are there red flags, and are there any stories you want to share on this topic?
Well, there was one where I represented a woman, and yeah, I definitely don't specialize in this. I don't know how I had so many of these cases. Who was the affair? She was a personal trainer, and she had an affair with the general manager of a gym, and she ended up getting pregnant. And his family, the general manager's family, owned the building and had a lot of major businesses, so they had a lot of assets. And she figured, for whatever reason, that he would leave his wife and that she'd be taken care of by this guy and his family. Of course, it did not work out that way. He did not leave his wife. But on top of that, when we did financial discovery, the child support case, we saw that this family definitely was not as rich as they made themselves out to be. They looked rich, but they certainly were not all that rich. And I think that that's a really important thing to keep in mind, is that there are a lot of people that might look rich on Instagram, that might have the bells and whistles, but they really don't have that kind of money. A lot of people are impressed by the bells and whistles, but it could be a very different story when you have a child with somebody who has all of that.
I see. And so that, I mean, that's a really good example. I mean, and hopefully she wasn't just trying to get pregnant so that she could be taken care of by this family. But I mean, people make all sorts of promises when they're having affairs, and one of them is always, I'm going to leave my wife or my
Right.
husband, whichever way. It certainly goes both ways. So we'll switch over. You guys might have a few fun stories about this. Not so fun for the people involved. But we'll switch over to Nicole.
I could tell you so many stories. It's not even funny. Unfortunately, that's the issue. There are so many stories, and I've heard it all. People will tell you, oh my God, I got to tell you this story, and you're never going to believe it. Well, unfortunately, you're probably more than a handful of people that I've dealt with that particular issue. The good thing is, once I tell them that and I kind of go, oh yeah, I had that exact same issue, and I explain the situation, they go, oh, well then you're the best attorney for me, because I understand. Well, unfortunately, like I said, a lot of this is very common to us. It may not be common to the public, but you're not alone. And I think that's the biggest thing that most people can take away, is that these situations happen on a daily basis. There's always affairs. There's always, well, we found this in his drawer that we didn't know about, or, this person's a sex addict, and we've heard it all. That's the bottom line. We've heard it all. We do know how to address each one of those cases. And realistically, you just want somebody that's going to understand that situation and take it personally, and figure out what is best for your client. Because at the end of the day, their situation is dire to them. And so you've just got to focus on, how can I help that person, and how can they grow and not be stuck in this rut of, oh my God, my life is just shattered and I don't know how to get out of it. And that's the biggest thing, is you got to get that hope. You got to understand that there's more to this than this one situation where you're coming to see me.
Yeah, absolutely. You're never going to be the only one that has dealt with that situation. In fact, you can walk into any coffee shop, gym, bar, like wherever you're hanging out, dinner somewhere, and you could probably overhear someone with the same story being played out over and over again, which is unfortunate, and which is why we're talking about red flags, things to look for, who is the best match for you. And so let's go into a little bit about mismatched people. So we'll go back to Joe and let him talk about some of the cases where people were just an obvious mismatch in certain areas, and anyone could see a divorce coming from a mile away.
Well, I know I had one. This was one of my most hotly contested cases. My client was the husband, and he was very, very much a by the books guy. Like, he was a great client because he would make Excel sheets regarding the finances and everything. He was very, very thorough, and he was a rules guy. The wife was really governed by her emotions. So I'm sure that that's something that attracted them to each other, was that she was a little bit more, live by the moment, and that was something that was missing in himself. And he provided the structure that she wasn't really able to provide for herself. But of course, when they got married and they had kids, it was a whole other issue. Like, one of the biggest issues was that um, he was very much into creating budgets, and she was not very much into following budgets. Um, so when they ended up in a very bad financial situation, he told me that people really wondered, how did you end up in this situation? And the truth is that it was really her. She would buy things that she wanted. without much regard for whether or not they had the money for it. So I actually once went to a seminar that was for forensic psychologists, and I was one of the few lawyers over there, and they talked about a very common scenario that leads to hotly contested divorces, which is where one person is obsessive compulsive and the other one is histrionic. Obsessive compulsive really means very moralistic, very much into rules, very much into authority, and histrionic is being very much into attention. So I think that a lot of people that crave attention um, like people that are a little bit controlling because they get the attention, and then people that are controlling kind of like people that are needy because they're easy to control. But that doesn't necessarily work when you're trying to have a life together and raise children together.
Yeah, those dynamics, they're fun, I guess, for those people in the beginning. But I mean, that's like one of the things you talk about. Like, because somebody is someone you're having fun dating doesn't always mean you should marry them. And you got to look at things like what kind of lifestyle do they have? Do they like to go out a lot while you're a homebody? Um, do they like the same activities as you? Do they want to have a big family or a little family, or family at all? Are they into family? Do you have a big loving family with lots of family events that they're just going to die if they have to go to all the time? I mean, there's so many mismatches that people just ignore those things in the beginning, and over the years it gets harder and harder to ignore it, and you spend more and more time apart because you didn't like the same things. But I'm not the one with all the experience. So let's go to Nicole. I'm sure you have real life experiences with some of these really mismatched couples.
Well, I think you brought up a great point, because the reality is opposites do attract. And that's great. But you have to look at your core values, because while that might be an attraction to you, it may come back to bite you in the time of the divorce, because of the severity of the attraction and the huge conflict between the two of you and personality wise. It's funny that Joe mentions that, and I think I've heard like that exact same scenario about 100 times with my clients, where you always have one person, and it's usually an engineer, that has that budgeting mentality, and this is the way things are focused. And again, if you don't have that, all you're going to end up doing is butting heads. All too often, that's one of the things that people can't get, they can't understand. And again, that's why they come to me and they go, I don't know what the finances are. My ex always took care of them. Well, that's one of those things that you have to be at least a little cautious, know about these things. Even if it's just a matter of looking at your tax returns at the end of the year and actually reading them before you sign them. I know it's a difficult concept, but do that. So you actually know what the assets are. Sometimes you're going to be shocked that, wait a minute, where did this 1099 come from? And what is this? And, oh, we have these assets that I didn't know anything. Why am I getting dividends? Like, those are easy ways for you to kind of figure out, wait, these are things that I had no idea about. The other thing is, where are they going? A lot of times, whether you're a workaholic or not, you have clients that are workaholics, but they're not coming home at night. Well, are they going out and partying with their friends? Are they going out with their buddies? Are they, just going to the gym and working out and just don't want to be home with you? I mean, there's a lot of different scenarios. So those are the types of things that you really got to kind of look at and go, what does that lifestyle look like? And should I be included in that lifestyle? And do I want to be included in that lifestyle?
And absolutely. And I think one of the points you made earlier was that, like, people don't really change. I mean, sometimes they do. Sometimes they'll pick up a hobby later on that they didn't have before. They may not have been a fitness nut, and then all of a sudden it's the biggest thing. And, now they want you to be that way too. And it's, you may like fitness, but you may not be looking to be Miss America. Whatever the situation is, it's definitely, I love the examples you gave about how they go spend time alone doing their activities. And if you don't even really know where they are, you should ask questions. It's good to trust somebody, but it's good to ask questions too, and figure out if it's just that they're avoiding being home, or you know, maybe there needs to be some conversations. And that being said, how many times do you find that, and I'll start with you, Nicole, this time on this question, try to start with one and let the other one answer too, is that, you know, somebody is living, the couple ends up living separate lives and not communicating at all. I mean, because, you know, oftentimes it's the little things, the little annoyances that you just, you know, they end up building up and over, you know, over and over time. And then all of a sudden you have a giant blow up over something tiny, but it was really like 20 things that you just didn't say. How often is it that happens in your divorce cases?
More often than not. I mean, it's always, you know, there's always that one thing that's the straw that broke the camel's back. I get it. But it was always something else leading up to it. There's always multiple things. Well, let me tell you about this, and let me tell you about this, and oh, I forgot to tell you, and what? I mean, and then they just start telling your entire life story of, well, I didn't like this, and I told them, and I didn't like this, and they didn't. And again, it's whether, first off, did you tell them that so that they could maybe correct it if it was something worth correcting? Two, does that other person ever think that that's something that is worth correcting? Or are they doing it on purpose because now they know it annoys you? So those are the things that you kind of got to look at. Where is that coming from? What is happening as a result of that? More importantly, when you bottle up and don't tell them anything, at some point you're going to explode. And the reality is, when that happens, there's no coming back, because they will say very nasty things that your spouse is going to go, hold on, I'm done with you. Like, that's my straw that broke the camel's back, because you've been bottling this up. You've been keeping this in for the last year or 2 years. And why didn't you tell me this if this is the way you were feeling? And so now you've got this immediate conflict where you could have avoided by just saying, hey, can you please close the closet door? It's really not that difficult. Or better yet, close it yourself, even though you've told them 100 times to close the closet door. You know, something like that, where again, they know it's going to annoy you, but it's their habits. It's the way they were brought up. So again, you have to kind of pick and choose as to how much am I going to let that annoy me, and when is it something that's worth talking about?
Sometimes you don't find that stuff out until you move in together. But I agree with you. I mean, those are all really good points. Joe, what do you have to add to this part of the conversation?
Yeah, I definitely second that. I think that there are a lot of times when you do have to pick your battles. I mean, I'm married, so yeah, I understand that we don't always do things the same way, and sometimes you just have to accept that we're different people, and that's it. One thing that I see in my area, I mean, the county where my office is, Queens County, New York, is widely considered to be the most diverse urban area in the world. So we have a lot of issues regarding different cultures. Um, so, you know, I was just doing a divorce where it's, you know, they come from two very different cultures. They're both immigrants, but my client, the wife, was a lot more what you'd call Americanized than the husband. So, one example was that um, even though they both worked, the husband had the idea that the housework was done by the wife. And when she would come home from work and she wouldn't get to the dishes right away, like most people wouldn't, he would start taking pictures of the sink, because he assumed that it was her job as the wife to do all the housework. Um, Another major issue is that in his culture, the extended family played a much more significant role in the nuclear family's life than what she was accustomed to. So she actually commented to me. She said, "You know, I always thought that when you say your family, you mean the wife, the husband, and the kids." His idea was that that also included the grandparents, the uncles, the aunts, the cousins, and everything. Um, so that was a pretty clear example of how it is that people just had very different assumptions of what life was going to be like. Um, and Yeah, I mean, I think that there are other things like a very common scenario is the role of the in-laws. I always find it fascinating when somebody who's in their 30s or 40s walks into my office with a parent, And then I know right away that that's probably going to be one of the issues. That it was one of the issues that led to the end of the marriage. Um, and then, of course, there are just personality conflicts, like the one that I mentioned, where where one person has a very significant need for control that the other person might find attractive in the beginning, but after a few years of marriage may not find so attractive anymore.
Wow, I mean, those are all incredible points. And you definitely had me laughing during some of those. With the, I'm sure everybody that's married has some kind of story about an in-law, and their ideas of how lots of things should happen, and from child rearing to picking your house for you to there's a lot, and it's definitely interesting when one person comes from a hands-off family and the other one's got a very controlling family. It's, you marry the family too, and to some extent, and you have to, really consider that in your, your situation when you're getting married. Okay, so we've been talking for quite a bit, and I think we could talk for days on this topic. I mean, it's just so interesting. There's so many stories. I'm going to ask each of you to close up with your final thoughts and any final stories you want to tell on this topic. Dating advice from divorce attorneys. We'll start with you, Joe.
So I think that the overarching theme is that when you marry somebody, it's not like when you were dating, when it's just somebody that you enjoy hanging out with and who you have feelings for. Once you get married, your spouse is involved in every aspect of your life. So that includes your financial life, that includes your home life. When you have children, then co-parenting becomes every big part of your life as everything else that you share with your spouse. So even though it's much easier said than done, marrying somebody has to be more than an emotional decision. You really need to be able to envision having this person be involved in every single aspect of your life. And if you cannot imagine that, then it's not really a good idea to marry that person.
That makes a lot of sense. And what are your thoughts, Nicole?
I'd say not only imagine it, but try to, can you live with it? Can you focus on that? So it's imagining it, and then to a certain degree, trying to practice it daily. So you're engaged, you're having this relationship, and you're invited over to a wedding or a gathering, and you're like, oh my God, you got to think about those things immediately. What does that make you feel when you're doing those things now? Because when you're doing them for 20 years of marriage, is it going to wear on you? You know your personality, what your tolerance level is. So again, not only imagining it, but before you get married, actually doing it. You don't have to live in the same roof with that person, but you have to actually somehow practice what those things are that you think is going to be important to your spouse. What do they like? How do they like it? Again, you're going to know, hopefully, by the time you're engaged, what foods do they like? What time do they like to eat for dinner? When do they, when is their downtime of the day? Those are the things that, again, even if you're not living together, you're going to have an understanding of that. And if you don't, then you're jumping into it too quickly.
I think that's really great. I mean, and even noticing things like, do they need some alone time for their thoughts? Some people are just introverts and they marry extroverts, and sometimes those people need that time alone, and the extrovert doesn't understand that because they haven't seen them all day, and all they want to do is talk to them about everything. And I mean, there's just like disconnects like that you don't always catch unless you're looking for them. And so I think this would be a great book, like a lot of the stuff that we talked about today. And maybe we should put together a little mini book with all of us on there. But yeah, this has been really great. I want to thank you both for coming on. Joe, we've had a ton of interviews over the last 6 months, and this is a really fun one. And so thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me and for all your time.
Thank you. And Nicole, thank you so much. You are a just wealth of knowledge and stories on all of these topics. And I know we'll be talking again soon about some more topics, but thanks so much for being here today and helping people that are out there listening. You just really look out for some of those red flags that maybe they didn't think of before.
Not only look out for those red flags, but if you have any questions, just come see me before you make that plunge. We can have a conversation. So again, maybe you know how to address those issues so that you're not that statistic that we talked about.
Absolutely. So if you are in the Massachusetts area, there's no one better to see than Nicole. She's amazing. Talk to her. She can go through all of the situations and the options and make you feel very comfortable with your knowledge at the end of it. And Joe is in New York City. Attorney Joseph Nivin. He's amazing. His clients rave about him. Lots of great success stories, and just really down to earth people, both of you. I'm not there to, stick it to anyone, just there to get like a fair outcome for everybody involved, whether it's in a prenuptial situation or a divorce situation or any of the other um, things that happen in family court. So I want to thank you both. I definitely want to give them both a plug. They're just amazing. And we'll look forward to talking to you guys again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.